Welcome, my dear friends. It's exceptional to see you today. In case we haven't been introduced, I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. On this episode, we're going back for another dramatic reading from The Adventures of the Baron Munchausen. Hopefully you've enjoyed the first two episodes we did of that, and if you haven't checked those out, I would recommend you do so. They are entertaining. And in case you are unfamiliar with the topic of the Baron Munchausen and his fantastical adventures, these are tall tales that involve wild crap such as hitching a ride through the air on cannonballs, going to the moon and picking cucumbers off of trees that grow there, and forcing a wolf to pull his sleigh across a winterscape. Now, he was a real person, and in later life he got a little bit embarrassed about what all people were accusing him of saying he did. But he was definitely one of those guys that said, "I caught a fish this big," when in fact it was probably this big. But he was a gentleman adventurer, and he has inspired me and many other men around the world to dream bigger, to go forth in search of excitement to new lands and to new ladies, because they truly are the most beautiful things God ever made. In the first chapter that we read, the Baron trekked into Russia to secure himself a commission as an officer in the Tsar's military. In the second part, he went on campaign against the Turk. And now in this third part, well, it's something, all right. And now, just for scale, what I'm about to read you fits into less than 8 pages of text, large font, and lots of pictures. So, buckle up. Chapter 5. The Baron, captured and made a prisoner of war and sold for a slave, keeps the Sultan's bees, which are attacked by 2 bears, loss of one of his bees, a silver hatchet in an attack with the bears, rebounds and flies up to the moon, brought back by an ingenious invention, falls to the earth on his return and helps himself out of a pit, extricates himself from a carriage which meets his in a narrow lane in a manner never before attempted or since practiced, the great and wonderful effects of the frost upon his servant's French horn. I mean, just that introduction part. We're in for it, my dear friends. Notwithstanding all my courage, notwithstanding the speed, the cleverness, the readiness of my horse, I was not always successful. I had the misfortune to be overpowered by numbers, to be made prisoner of war, and, what is worse, but always usual among the Turks, to be sold for a slave. In that state of humiliation, my daily task was not very hard or laborious, but rather singular and irksome. It was to drive the Sultan's bees every morning to their pasture grounds, to attend them all day long, and against night to drive them back to their hives. Yes, a bee herder. One evening I missed a bee, and soon observed that 2 bears had fallen upon her to tear her to pieces for the honey she carried. I had nothing like an offensive weapon in my hands but the silver hatchet, which is the badge of the Sultan's gardeners and farmers. I threw it at the robbers with an intention to frighten them away and set the poor bee at liberty. But by an unlucky turn of my arm, it flew upwards and continued rising till it reached the moon. How should I recover it? How fetch it down again? I recollected that turkey beans grow very quickly and run up to an astonishing height. I planted one immediately. It grew and actually fastened itself to one of the moon's horns. I had no more to do now but to climb up by it into the moon, where I safely arrived and had a troublesome piece of business before I could find my silver hatchet in a place where everything has the brightness of silver. At last, however, I found it in a heap of chaff and chopped straw. I was now returning, but alas, the heat of the sun had dried up my bean, and it was totally useless for my descent. So I fell to work and twisted me a rope of that chopped straw, as long and as well as I could make it. This I fastened to one of the moon's horns and slid down to the end of it. Here I held myself fast with the left hand, and with the hatchet in my right, I cut the long, now useless end off the upper part, which, when tied to the lower end, brought me a good deal lower. This repeated splicing and tying of the rope did not improve its quality and bring me down to the Sultan's farms. I was 4 or 5 miles from the earth, at least, when it broke. I fell to the ground with such amazing violence that I found myself stunned, and in a hole about 9 fathoms deep, made by the weight of my body falling from so great a height. I recovered, but knew not how to get out again. However, necessity is a good counselor. I dug a sort of flight of stairs with my fingernails. The Baron's nails were then of 40 years' growth and easily accomplished it. Taught by this experience, I invented a better plan for getting rid of the bears who wanted to get at my bees and hives. I took and daubed the pole of a cart with honey, which done, I hid myself hard by to see what would happen. A bear of gigantic size, attracted by the smell of the honey, came and set to work to lick the end of the pole so greedily that he ended up letting it slide whole into his throat and so into his stomach. When he was well spitted, I ran up and drove a big peg into the whole place to the pole's end, and so cutting off the epicure's retreat. I left him where he was till next morning. I thought the Sultan, who chanced to walk that way, would have died of laughing when he saw the trick I had played on the bear. Peace was soon after concluded between the Turks and the Russians, and I was sent back to St. Petersburg with several other prisoners of war. Soon after I took my leave of Russia, at the time of that singular revolution, when the Emperor in his cradle, his mother, the Duke of Brunswick, her father, Field Marshal Munich, and many others were sent to Siberia. The winter was then so uncommonly severe all over Europe that the sun himself got chilblains, the effect of which may still be seen on his face. At my return to this place, I felt on the road greater inconveniences than those I had experienced on my setting out. I traveled post, and finding myself in a narrow lane, bid the postilion give a signal with his horn that other travelers might not meet us in the narrow passage. He blew with all his might, but his endeavors were in vain. He could not make the horn sound, which was unaccountable and rather unfortunate, for soon after we found ourselves in the presence of another coach coming the other way. There was no proceeding. However, I got out of my carriage, and being pretty strong, placed it, wheels and all, upon my head. I then jumped over a hedge about 9 feet high, which, considering the weight of the coach, was rather difficult, into a field, and came out again by another jump into the road beyond the other carriage. I then went back for the horses, and placing one under either arm, by the same means brought them to my coach, put to, and proceeded to an inn at the end of our stage. I should have told you that the horse under my arm was very spirited and not above 4 years old. In making my second spring over the hedge, he expressed great dislike to that violent kind of motion by kicking and snorting. However, I confined his hind legs by putting them into my coat pocket. After we arrived at the inn, my postilion and I refreshed ourselves. He hung his horn on a peg near the kitchen fire. I sat on the other side. Suddenly, we heard a twang, 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 twang. We looked around and now found the reason why the postilion had not been able to sound his horn. His tunes were frozen up in the horn and came out now by thawing. Plain enough, and much to the credit of the driver, so that the honest fellow entertained us for some time with a variety of tunes without putting his mouth to the horn. The King of Prussia's March, Over the Hill and Over the Dale, with many other favorite tunes. At length, the thawing entertainment concluded, as I shall this account of my Russian travels. Most travelers, when they narrate their adventures, are in the habit of saying that they have seen a great deal more than they really have. Hence it is not to be wondered at that readers and listeners should be at times disposed to incredulity. But if, in the company that I have the honor of addressing, anyone should be tempted to doubt the truth of the statements I make, I should be deeply pained by this want of confidence. And I should intimate to him that the best thing he could do would be to take his leave before I begin to relate my adventures by sea, for they are far more wonderful, though not less authentic. So yeah, we got all that in those few pages. He was a bee herder that grew a bean to the moon, honeyed up a pole and trapped a giant bear on it. And the only thing inconvenient about leaping over 9-foot obstacles from a narrow lane was just how heavy the carriage was. It wasn't how heavy the horses were, or the fact that from a standstill, he jumped 9 feet. No. It was just the carriage was a bit heavy because it was a post carriage, and so it had mail in it. So I hope that you enjoyed this tale of panache and adventure and a sense of wonder. And as the Baron says, this concludes his tales of his journeys through Russia on land. This concludes our first run of Baron Munchausen stories. Though we'll come back to it. Believe me, I love the stories too much. I love the character too much. And I want to help spread that around to people, to bring back cool things from the past so people can keep enjoying them. And if you enjoyed this, I too enjoy it when people like and subscribe, so hit that thumb, hit that rumble button, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on these stories. And what would you find most inconvenient about leaping over a 9-foot hedge while carrying 2 horses, one under each arm? And my dear friends, I thank you for your time and that you chose to spend it with me and the Baron. And as we part for now, I wish you nothing but the best.